There we are. There she is. How are we doing,
Here we
Tanya?
are. Good, good. How are you?
I am doing great. Wow, our heads are big on the screen,
Yes.
and yours looks better than mine. So focus on Tanya, everybody. Focus on Tanya.
I would say neutral. It depends. It's like the story you read today.
Yeah, there we go. Welcome everyone to Limitless Live. It is what's today? Tuesday. Tuesday here on Limitless Live. All the days rolling together, and
Yes.
excited. Tanya, you and I were talking about leadership and high performing teams.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming off of a holiday weekend. Those of us here in the U.S. So, Tanya, what is something that you are grateful for the last 3 or 4 days?
Um, it'll ironically, I am thankful for Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
because it is not a holiday that we have in Mexico. But thanks to the fact that I lived in the US, now it has become something that I really love doing because it's a great reminder. It's a great reminder to just like be aware of everything that we have to be grateful for. How about you? And eat good food.
And
At
good
least.
food. Yes, yes. Well, Justin, thank you for letting us know that both heads look great. That's very kind. Good morning, Rebecca. Martin, how we doing? I'm really grateful for being able to just kind of open up our home, which is just a small apartment that we're living in right now. But we were able to open up our home over the long holiday weekend to two international students at the school who kind of needed a place to stay for the long weekend. And my two sons go to the school, and so we were able to have two additional students, and just to have them to bring them in to be part of the family, and it just adds a completely new dynamic and component, and it was fun. It completely changed sort of the activities that we did, and so I love that sense of just expanding the tent and having a bigger family, if you will. So I'm super grateful for that.
I love that. And again, like being on the other side of it, being the person that always got invited, it makes such a huge difference when you're away from your family and then you have a family like take you in and share their food and their traditions and their activities with you. It's amazing.
Well, and in some ways, it relates to sort of the topic
Mhm.
today. Yeah, this is a transition. The idea of leadership, of high performing teams. How do great leaders create great high performing teams? And I think the starting point for me when thinking about that again is just the idea of culture,
Mhm.
having values, being intentional about your values, and again going back to family. Every family has family values. They have family norms. They have, this is how we do things in our house. It's so funny. Like the two boys came over, and one of them kind of came in the door. He's like, "Do you need me to take my shoes off? Do I?" It's like, hey, how do we do? Do we do that here? Are we a shoes on, shoes off? And when we think about creating cultures and team dynamics, a lot
Mhm.
of it comes down that culture of values is really important.
Absolutely.
So Tanya, tell me and tell everybody, um, who are you working with right now? What is some of the work that you're doing most recently? And let's dive into it a little bit. I want to hear some real team issues that you've been working on recently.
I'm a little bit all over the place right now, which is something I love. Working with a lot of coaches and managers and who are leaders. So I've had also the opportunity to just learn a lot from how they do this in rugby, in baseball, and in football, soccer. And so it's just, every day there's examples of great leadership. Um, and just being able to see that as it unfolds, it's
Mhm.
amazing.
We were talking offline before we started here, thinking about leaders, and so what are some of those qualities that great consistent leaders tend to have. And so before you and I start giving our own list of qualities that we think great leaders have, I'm going to invite everybody in the chat. What do you think is a quality that great leaders have? and fill them up in the chat. And I'm sure there's some gold nuggets that are going to be there as well.
Mhm.
So if I were to ask you, Tanya, what is the number one, and not that they're really kind of ranked, but when you think of the first quality from a great team leader, what comes to mind?
Hui. I More than a quality, I think it's a skill. And
Yeah.
we talked about it yesterday, but it's the skill of noticing, of
Mm.
having awareness of themselves and the people around them and the situation, and kind of being able to be purposeful and intentional with whatever it is that they are noticing.
Yeah. The ability to be noticed. So from your experience, Tanya, what does it take for a leader to be able to have that level of awareness, right? Because that level of awareness requires confidence. It requires, a certain self-belief and comfort. So what's it take? And we're seeing great examples in the chat here. We're seeing good listener, being a good listener. Krista,
Mhm.
the we versus me. Mayho being open-minded. Rebecca, in service to others. Yeah, not the other way around. And so how does that show up, Tanya, the being able to notice?
I think more than confidence that you said, I think it requires a willingness to be vulnerable, because the first thing is like noticing things that are happening inside of you. And so kind of it can get scary. It can get scary to have that level of like self-awareness and dig deep on what's happening with you and what's happening in the interactions, and kind of noticing. um and the other thing, and that's something that you mentioned, so you can talk a little bit about that, when we had this conversation 2 years ago, is caring. Like, you have to care about doing it and about the people around you in order for the skill to be developed, I think.
Yeah, I think caring is so important, because if you don't genuinely if you don't genuinely care about the people that you're leading, or the people that you're coaching, or the people that you're serving, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, they're going to feel that level of care, right? Because it has to be genuine, and it has to be another word, Tanya, that was just voted the word of the year for Merriam-Webster's dictionary for 2023. Leaders have to be
Authentic.
authentic. Yes, authentic, the word of the year for 2023. And so I think of that caring, right? To be caring, if it comes from a genuine sense of authenticity, that and the team feels that, or your coworkers feel that, or your kids feel that, they
Mhm.
feel that authentic caring. It's less about what the other values are, as much as it is being true to who you say you are. And you mentioned vulnerable, right? That just that quality of vulnerability, right?
Mhm.
When you're vulnerable as a leader, it kind of gives permission to the group that they can be vulnerable as well.
Yeah, and I do want to touch a little bit about that, because I think authenticity is a word that we may take for granted, but it also takes self-discovery, because to be authentic, you need to know what really matters to you, who you really want to be. And so and kind of peeling layers of who you also don't want to be, but you learned. And so it's kind of a mix of like self-discovery, but then having the willingness to show yourself as you are. But
Yeah.
first, I think you have to know who you are.
Yeah. So the starting point for the coach then is to have a certain amount of self-discovery for themselves,
Hmm.
to understand who they are. There's a video going around right now, Tanya, of Steve Kerr. And Steve Kerr, who is the head coach of the Golden State Warriors in the NBA, but four-time NBA champion coach, won 3 NBA titles as a player. And he was saying that before he was ever a head coach, he was speaking to Pete Carroll, who
Hmm.
was an NFL coach with the Seattle Seahawks. And Pete asked Steve that question, well, what kind of coach are you going to be? And Steve was like, well, what do you mean? Like X's and O's? He goes, no, not X's and O's. What's the impact you want to have on the players that you coach? What do you want them to feel when they play for you?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want them to feel when they come to practice? What do you want them to feel inside the building? That's the most important thing. And Steve said, I had never thought about that before. I was just a player, or this is this kind of style of basketball that I want. But he's like, yeah, and that gets to your point of self-discovery as a leader, being really clear on
Mm-hmm.
what is right. Who am I at my core, and what do I want to share with the people that I lead or people that I work with?
Yeah. And to add to that, I think it's also this ability to operate on a micro and a macro level, or micro and macro,
Mhm.
because it's kind of this dance of like I have to look into me but then also look into the people around me. And it's like some of the most amazing coaches I've seen, they can walk into the locker room and just notice, like they know what's happening emotionally with their players. They're watching, they're listening, and then they don't say that much, like on the halftime talks, but they say the right things because they were watching and they were listening, and that's macro for the group. But then they might also just take a player aside because that player maybe is at a different energy focus level than the others, and so it's like focusing on the whole team but then also
Mm.
the individual people. And I think it applies in terms like, yeah, we want to focus on the team's goals, but then also what are the individual motivations of the people around you. So it's kind of being able to have that zoom in and zoom out.
Yeah, I love thinking about the macro and the micro that you mentioned, because the macro is kind of the standard, the goal of what the whole group is trying to accomplish. But then the micro is the ability for that coach or for that leader to be able to connect with each team member
Mm-hmm.
individually, to understand like what makes them tick, to understand what's important to them, what their values are, what their purpose are, what their fears are, what their insecurities are, what their vulnerabilities are, and to be able to tap into those individually so that you can bring the best out in them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, it goes back to, but if you're someone who doesn't genuinely care, you're
Right.
probably not going to be able to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not going to trust you, right? We're not going to be vulnerable with someone that we don't trust.
Yes.
And so if we're not, if caring isn't genuine, if the caring isn't authentic, there's gonna be a distance between the coach and the worker, or the coach and the player.
Mm-hmm.
Does anything come to mind, Tanya, like when you think of how you've seen this sort of demonstrated by a coach in an environment, how you've seen a coach that just does a really good job, connecting one-on-one with his or her players, um, in a way that it might look small on the surface, but you see how effective it is in practice?
Yeah. And I think it's counterintuitive because generally, and I don't know if this has happened to you, but now when you go to a team, like players don't immediately jump up and say, I want to be a leader.
No, no, they don't.
Because I think we've gone to this idea that the leader is the one that gives like the best motivational speeches,
Hmm.
or the person that like, is talking for the team. But it's actually quite the opposite. What I've noticed is that this happens when they're really observing, when they're paying attention, both players and coaches in leadership roles. It's more about being aware of what's happening to the people around them, and being incredible listeners and observers, and kind of being intentional about it than about what they're saying, and it kind of being the vocal people.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. It's the real, the moment, it's the day to day, the moment to moment, it's the interactions, it's
Mhm.
the things that are not glamorous or sexy on the surface. It's not the big halftime speech. It's not the
No.
pregame speech. It's not the rah rah. the constant nurturing of, watering the garden of those relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and building that trust and building that respect. And so if that's what it takes, Tanya, what are then the skills? You talked about skills. What are the skills then that are required to sort of, put those into practice? So if we take the values and we turn them into actions or skills, what are some of those actions and skills? What do they look like?
I'll say one, and then I want to hear from you because I know you also have experience working with some incredible leaders in and out of sports. I think again, the first one, and to me, it's the basis is developing awareness,
Hmm.
kind of self awareness and awareness of others, and kind of how that works um, consistently. And like, I know I will sound like a broken record, but this is where like being able to get to neutral
Hmm.
is huge because you're naming things as they're happening, and you're kind of trying noticing them as they happen, but without that huge emotional content, and without like what you said, like all of these belief systems. You're kind of just seeing things as they're happening. So I would say like the first one would be probably just developing awareness, and that's there's a thousand ways I think where that can happen, or things that people can do to be more aware.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And when you say awareness, what comes to mind for me is just clarity as a leader, to be really, really clear not only on the team values and the team identity, but just to have that sense of clarity. I think allows them to be so aware of what's going on in the environment around them,
Hmm.
so that they can, step in and address what needs to be addressed, and, push the right buttons and be effective that way.
Yeah. What's another one you think?
Yeah, I would say, for me, and I think this applies at every level, right? So I'm still working with a few college teams. I was working with a professional team this past year, and I see it done really well, but I still always see a need for relentless communication,
Yes.
right? Relentless communication, relentless, nonstop communication. And the reason being for that is, and you understand, once you're really like in the inside of a team, what you really sort of recognize and understand is that everybody in there, it's going to sound funny, everybody in there is a person, and each of them has their own life, and clearly they're most concerned about themselves first and foremost, not in a selfish way, but in a way that any of us would be.
Hmm.
And so, yes, people are going to be thinking about the team goals and the success of the team. But, at the end of the day, or I'd say at the beginning of the day, each person in that locker room, or each person in your office, or each person in your organization, they're really asking themselves the question is like, what is my role here? Do I have a role here? Am I valued here?
Hmm.
If I'm not in a position that I want to be in, playing time, etc., what do I need to do to improve that? Um, and so everyone is asking that question over and over, like, am I valued here? What can I do to do more here? And so for coaches and for leaders, like, you to have a good one-on-one interaction with someone 2 weeks ago, that's not enough, right?
No.
Because they've created 1,000 stories
Hmm.
about you, about the team, or about themselves since the last time you had a one-on-one interaction with them. Because that's what we do, right? When we don't have constant communication, is that we create stories, right?
Right.
Our ego, our brain, we're going to create stories. This is why my manager doesn't like me, or my coach doesn't like me, da da da. We create stories, and those stories are never good stories.
No. And is it? I was just gonna say that, like, we know that there's negativity bias, right? We know that most of our thoughts, I think the percentage is between 75 and 90% is
Yeah,
negative. And so
really negative.
when you're leaving blanks, then those blanks get filled with the negativity.
Yeah.
And so, and it may not be, especially with high performers, maybe not even about the relationship, but maybe they're being very harsh on themselves, maybe they're being perfectionist. And so
Mhm.
when they receive feedback from their leaders, like, hey, you're doing a really good job in this, or like, and you're very punctual, you can like point to different actions and attitudes and things that you want to see, then it's like you said, they feel seen, they feel listened to, they feel that they matter, and you're not letting that empty space just become like a cloud of negativity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that clarity, right? It's that clarity. The more clarity we have around a situation,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to tell, again, in sports, to be able to go up to a player before a game, a match, a contest, and say, hey, this is the reason you're not playing today, right? Or I'm not sure if you're going to play today. This is what I'm thinking about, you know. And when we give people that clarity, again, it makes it more difficult to create stories. They don't have to agree with your reason. So Greg Berhalter, who's the U.S. men's national soccer team coach, told me one time, he's like, Travis, I'll tell a player, hey, I might be wrong here, but this is why I made the decision that I made.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Like, yeah, like I could be wrong. I could be getting this wrong, but this is why I'm playing this player over that player. Or this is why, I don't think you're going to get minutes today. And obviously that player doesn't have to agree with you, but at least they know where they stand.
Yes.
Right. And so great. We had that conversation. And so if I'm a coach or I'm a leader, I want to make sure that I'm continuously checking in with those players and continuing to give feedback and clarity so that they know where they stand. And if they've been working on certain things, I can say, hey, I can see you've been working on this, but we're still not there yet. Or the work's coming great, stay at it.
Mm-hmm.
But that clarity, just because when and if that's just one player, you start to have a couple of players and they're not happy and they don't know what's going on. Well, then now you can start to have that take over the culture and take over
Yeah.
the locker room, and things can go south really quickly.
Yes. And I want to add to that, because for me, relentless communication, also a very counterintuitive part, but that I think is massive, is asking questions.
Mm.
Kind of really showing up with openness and curiosity when you're asking those questions. Um, this is something that I work really, really hard with the coaches, because it's something that you have to like get them back to do again, because they love talking, right? They love saying, this is what I think, this is, but but when they're having those conversations with the players and they're asking questions, they're kind of leading the players to think and reflect, but also to open their perspective, right? Because sometimes it's like, yeah, if I could put 21 people to play, they would, right? And so it's like asking different kinds of questions, like, what do you think
Mm.
could be doing better? Or how would you see in this system, you have these qualities, and this is what I need. Like, how would you see yourself playing into it? And so, yeah, I think, it leads to having more of those conversations. And I'm going to say relentless and probably also courageous, because asking questions kinds of also opens up to different kinds of answers. And so a coach has to be willing to listen and know that the answers that they might get might not be the ones that they were expecting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that takes humility. Like you said, it takes courage. It takes humility, being willing to probably understand and accept that, hey, there's probably some areas that I need to improve on. I probably have some blind spots. Um, and so, yeah, you can start to pick away at some of these qualities and be like, yeah, this is what it takes,
Hmm.
right? If I don't have humility, I'm not going to ask for feedback on what my weaknesses are.
Yeah.
And so when you think of, I loved some of those questions that that leaders can ask. One question I heard that I have always thought is a great question to ask when you're in a leadership position is, what is, what is something, what is something that you need from me that I'm not providing?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's probably just a blind spot.
Yeah.
It's probably not intentional. If I knew, right, if I knew better, I'd do better. So help me, right? So it takes a certain amount of, obviously, vulnerability and courage to do that, and willingness when you do get that feedback to really hear it.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, wow, we're almost out of time here, Tanya.
Mm-hmm. So, and because like one of the things we all love to do is leave people with like an actionable item. One that I want to bring is actually there's two activities. One is find 10 ways of asking the same question. And again, you don't have to use them all, but you like as a leader, as soon as you start asking questions, you'll see that sometimes the people you're asking them to might not understand them or might not.
Mm.
So it's like, what are 10 ways of asking the same thing? What are 10 ways of asking, how are you?
Yeah.
Um, and so that's one. And the other one is, what is one question that you could ask yourself every day to make sure that you are connecting with everyone on your team at some point?
Mm. How have you seen that? Have you seen that show up in person?
Yeah. So one of the questions that a coach came up with is, um, who am I not seeing?
Mm. Who am I not seeing? I like that. And so just the simple fact of asking that question is going to, it's going to pique the awareness, right?
Mhm.
It forces me to be aware and really pause and think about, yeah, who am I not seeing, or who have I not seen recently, or who have I not connected with? Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's going to be better than any takeaways I have, Tanya. You nailed it.
No, I want to hear your takeaways too.
No, you nailed it. I like that. 10 ways to ask the same question. A good question for ourselves as leaders is to ask ourselves, who am I not seeing? Because I guarantee, right, for leaders right now, think to yourself, on your team, who are you not seeing? A person just popped in your head. That's for a reason. Go
Hmm.
connect with them. And then you can ask them, how, what am I not doing that I could do to serve you better, to be a better
Uh-huh.
leader? I love it. Tiny, fantastic leadership on high performing teams. We could talk for a while, but I think that's a great place to get started.
Yes, and I hope everyone tunes in next week. Um, I should have asked who was gonna be doing the live.
I thought you were going to spring it on me. I was excited. It's a cliffhanger. Y'all going to have to come back next week and find
Yeah.
out. Thanks for being here, Tanya. Thanks to everyone for being here, being in the chat, and being here for this event. This has been Limitless Live. Success leaves clues. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you.